Great. So Ohio, New Hampshire, Minneapolis, Salt Lake, the UK, Netherlands. My goodness. All right. Washington, D.C., Cayman Islands. Wish I was there today, I think. And let me turn on my video so you guys can see me. Great. So I think we are all set up and ready to go. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I want to thank you for joining me today. For today's webinar, Communicate Beautifully, How to Present Your Ideas and Inspire Your Audience to Action. So I'm very excited to be here with you today. I'm so glad you made this time for yourself. So we have Sunnyvale, California. Let's see, what else? Boston, great, perfect. So let's dive in. So I want to start off by saying that if you are here to learn how to become a better, more confident communicator, then I am so happy you're here. A few weeks ago, I ran a survey to my audience, and maybe some of you here took it. If you did, thank you. And one of the top concerns that I heard from people were having fears about getting your ideas across clearly and powerfully. So I heard different comments like, clear, straightforward communication of ideas and information is a challenge for me. And I'm growing into a leadership role and I need to level up my communication. And I also heard from a lot of the entrepreneurs who are in my audience who said that they're running their own business and that a big part of that is presentation skills. They know it's a crucial part of their business, but it's scary nonetheless. So if any of these sound like you, then I want to assure you that you are in the right place. So go ahead and in the comments, let me know which of these statements can you relate to the most. Is it number one, that clear and straightforward communication is a challenge for you? Are you more in the category of number two? So are you growing into a leadership role at work and you know you need to level up your communication skills? Or are you in the third camp? So my entrepreneurs and small business owners out there who know you need to do a lot of presentations as part of your business, but maybe you have some fear around that. So which of these resonates with you the most? So great, I see people, a lot of ones here. We have some twos from Stephanie, Amy, Christina, Stacy says number three. Let's see. Christine says 1 and 3. So yeah, you can absolutely fall into both categories. And Michael says none of those. I am awesome at communication. That is great, Michael. You might have some things to teach us, so we want to hear of that. Julie, Charles, number 2. So John says, I'm a lawyer and I need to crush the competition. So definitely, if you're in a competitive field, getting an edge by being able to communicate well is so important. Fear of presentations. Great. All great things. Glad to hear that these are resonating with you as well. So today you're going to learn proven psychological techniques to connect with your audience, drive conversations forward, and influence people to come around to your way of thinking. But first, I want to call out the elephant in the room. So you are probably here because you've tried to improve your communication skills in the past, but maybe it hasn't gone so well. So maybe you've lacked the know-how, or perhaps you ran into different concerns that held you back from really making meaningful progress. Whatever it is, you're probably wondering why you should focus on learning communication now and trying to get better if you've tried before and found it hard. Well, the truth is that no matter who you are, powerful communication matters. And if you have great ideas, you have to know how to articulate them in order to get ahead. And that goes for whether you're trying to sell a product or a service, or if you're trying to get your boss and colleagues to believe in a new idea. Communication is an indispensable skill, and it's one that can actually make you more money in the forms of being able to get more sales or being able to get a promotion at work. But it's also one of the best ways to broaden your influence and make a bigger impact. And since you're here today, since you're on this webinar, I'm guessing that's something you care about. But perhaps one of the biggest benefits of upping your communication skills is improving your self-esteem. So learning to master the skills we're going to talk about today can help you feel much more confident in your capabilities and help you believe in yourself more. So who doesn't want that? Conquering your fears and speaking up for your ideas is massively self-empowering. Now, before we dive in, I do want to take a minute to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, Beautiful.ai. So Beautiful.ai is making it easier than ever before to communicate your ideas at work, and they're starting with presentation design. So all you have to do is choose your design theme, input your content, and watch the magic of their design AI tool go to work. Their tool actually lays out all the text, the images, and the graphics for you in real time so that you can focus on your content and your ideas and not the look of the page. And Beautiful has a lot of really great tools that can help make your presentations pop and really add that wow factor. So they have things like stock photography, branding options, data visualizations, and much, much more. I am very excited to be partnering with them because this is a tool I personally use to create presentations, including the one you're going to watch today. So in the past, one of the main comments I would get about my trainings is that my slides needed work. So when Beautiful approached me, I was very excited to give their tool a try. And even after the first time using it, I was completely hooked. It's incredibly simple to use, and it truly does save me a ton of time. So something simple like creating a timeline or a graph, if you've ever tried to do that in PowerPoint, you've probably found out, just like I have, that it's incredibly difficult, and it would take me an hour or more. Doing that in Beautiful takes a few seconds. And you can add music, animations, and a whole lot more, so your presentations really have a big impact. And best of all, they help you look like the professional that you are. It's also completely free to use. So it doesn't get much better than that. So I want all of you to go over to melodywilding.com/beautiful, where you can start making your work beautiful today. And again, I want to thank them for sponsoring this webinar. Great. So let's take a look at what we'll be covering today. I'm going to share with you 3 key components for presenting your ideas powerfully and inspiring your audience to action. So you're going to discover how to communicate your ideas effectively, including how to organize your information and make your ideas memorable. Next, we're going to talk about how to present for results and get people to take action, whether you're presenting to 1 person or 100. And last, we're going to discuss strategies for getting buy-in for your ideas. So meaning how to influence and persuade your audience to say yes to your ideas, and how to bounce back even if you do hear a no. And finally, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So as I'm going along, if you do have questions, please pop those in the comments. I have that up so I can see them. So put questions in so I can make sure to address them at the end. Now, my goal for today is to make this webinar as interactive as possible. So I don't want you to hesitate to share what's resonating with you, what you're finding interesting, or even if you have your own experiences to offer, please do share those too. We're all here to learn. So today, I'm going to be sharing a lot of information with you. There's no need to jot down notes because you will get the replay of this recording and the slides. So what I do want to ask of you, I do have one request, and that is I want you to give yourself the gift of being fully present during this time. So in order to really get the most out of this webinar training, give it your full intention. I'm guessing that you've probably signed up for events, for trainings like this in the past, but you haven't used them to their full capacity. So make a promise to yourself now to make this time different. Okay, so here's what you can expect. By the end of this webinar, you will know how to leverage the power of psychology to improve your communication. You'll feel more confident presenting your ideas to influential decision makers like your boss, clients, customers, investors, executive teams. And you're going to be armed with actionable strategies you can implement today that will help you engage, motivate, and inspire your audience to take action more quickly and with better results. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Melody Wilding. I'm an executive coach who has worked with clients at companies like Google, Facebook, HP, IBM, and many others. And my specialty is really helping smart, ambitious people just like you master your psychology for greater success. I am also a human behavior professor at a university here in New York City, and I write about psychology for Inc., Forbes, Quartz, and Business Insider. And with that, let's get started. So we have all been there. We've all felt that pain of trying to present complex ideas in a clear, concise, professional manner. So tell me if this situation sounds familiar. You are standing in front of a packed conference room, delivering a presentation that could make or break your career. You spent days meticulously designing your deck. You memorized every last word you want to say. And now it's go time, and the pressure is really on. But there's just one problem. No one is listening to you. They're all too busy reading the text on your slides to even follow what you're saying. And your heart starts to begin to pound. You start to panic as you realize you only have 10 minutes left on the clock, but you're barely halfway through your deck. So you end up skipping over chunks of your content, which disrupts the entire flow of the meeting and just leaves all of your colleagues and your boss feeling really confused. So tell me if that has ever happened to you. Go ahead in the comments if you've ever been there before. Or how about this? Maybe you finally nail down a big meeting with an investor. And in an effort to impress them, you create an hour-long talk all about your background and why they should invest in you. But as you're giving your presentation, you get a few minutes in, the investor abruptly interrupts you and says, "Can you please just cut to the chase? I already knew about all of this." And you realize in that moment that you failed to understand what she was really there for, which was not to hear about your entire life story, but to understand more about the product you have to sell. So in both of these situations, it's really easy to feel demoralized, foolish, or even embarrassed and worried that you blew what could potentially be a big opportunity. And for these reasons, it's why communicating effectively and presenting yourself in a professional way really does need to be one of your top priorities. So I see a lot of yes, people relating with both of those scenarios many times. Yeah, definitely being told to get to the point before. Great. So if you want to be successful, then you need to then you need to present for impact, persuade, and get buy-in for your ideas. And you can do that by learning to better leverage what we know about how humans process information and make decisions. So there's actually a really deep psychology behind what motivates people to buy, say yes, or engage with you. And the good news is it's one that you can learn. Now, if you're thinking that you're not good at communicating, that you're someone who's not good at communication, then don't worry. The truth is that most of us are never taught the principles of masterful communication in any type of course or class. But what I do know from coaching hundreds of high achievers is that effective communication and influence are skills, not inborn traits. And like any skill, they can be learned, which is what you're going to discover today. Now, these skills do take time and they do take practice to perfect, but you're going to learn strategies that you can walk away with and implement today so that you can get better results, whether you are selling a product, pitching a business idea, or trying to convince your team to follow a new direction. So first, let's talk about 5 steps you need to follow to ensure that you're connecting with your listeners. So step 1 is to put your audience first. Now, to connect with your listeners, you need to understand why your topic is important to them. You don't just want to share, you don't just want the information you're sharing to be about you or to focus only on what you need from them. So if you want to break through, Your message needs to convey what's in it for your audience. Why should they care? Why does your topic matter to them? And it's vital to understand what motivates your listeners. So their goals, their most pressing pain points, their problems, their desires. And you can understand these motivations by researching your audience in advance. You want to know the level of knowledge they have about your topic so that you can present information with the right tone and at the right level to keep them interested and engaged. There's nothing more insulting than sharing very basic information to a highly knowledgeable audience, or on the other hand, speaking at too high a level to a beginner audience. So understanding your audience and their expectations can really make the difference between a run-of-the-mill presentation and an unforgettable one. You also want to be mindful not to become a talking head. You don't want to hog the conversation by doing all the talking. You want to focus on building in opportunities for interaction into how you present. So some simple ways to do this might be starting out with a poll, just like we did today, and as I'm trying to do throughout this presentation, asking questions or taking a simple show of hands. You want to invite feedback and pause periodically throughout your talk to give others a chance to speak. Now, when it comes to sharing important ideas, many of us get up in our own heads. So if you've ever been guilty of getting in your own head about presenting, give me a yes, give me a heads up if that's ever been you. I have definitely been there before. We worry about looking intelligent enough, right? You get hung up on how people are judging you or perceiving you. And the truth is that in reality, people are more concerned, and what they really want is the opportunity to interact and connect with you. They would prefer to have a conversation with a normal human being and an authentic person. So think about the best talks that you've been to. I'm willing to bet that they had more of a conversational feel that really allowed you as an audience member to feel involved and invested and engaged. So you want to recreate this feeling by showing up as yourself. Set the expectation up front that you want your time together with your listeners to feel more like a conversation. And most of all, don't be afraid to show up as you truly are. So there is nothing worse than a presentation that seems like it'll never end, or a person who just drones on and on and on, right? People already get hundreds of emails and phone calls and messages each and every day. You don't want your information contributing to that feeling of overload, or worse, simply being cast aside because it's just too much for people to process. People get very impatient and annoyed when you waste their very valuable time, or you force them to work mental overtime in order to even grasp what you're saying. So you don't want this happening to you. And that's why mastering the art of brevity in your communication is one of the most important 21st century skills that you can embrace. Simple and concise is always better than complicated and confusing. And I know that taking a less is more approach to presenting, it might feel counterintuitive at first. I hear from clients all the time that they feel concerned that it will seem like they don't know what they're doing, or that they don't have enough to say if they take this less is more approach. But in actuality, being concise with your information shows you have command over your knowledge. It proves that you don't have to rely on slides to do the explaining for you. So that makes a really powerful impression that you are the expert. And it also shows your audience that you respect them, that you respect their attention spans and their time. So whenever you're crafting your slides, it's critical to be succinct. Great communicators know how to get to the point quickly, and they know how to cut out superfluous details and know what not to tell their audience just as much as what to tell them. Now, step number 3 is to be memorable. And to make sure your information sticks, you want to focus on two main facets of human psychology. The first is called the primacy and recency effect. So research shows that we remember information at the beginning and the end of a presentation nearly 2 times more than the information in the middle. So let's take this webinar, for example. So are you paying attention to me? It's okay. It's okay to be honest. I bet that since we started and now that we're heading into the middle of the training, your attention span has faded a little bit. I see a lot of yeses, so I'm glad you guys are paying attention. That was a little test there. You see what I did. But it's okay, and it's natural for attention spans to fade. But you do want to be aware of this tendency when you're building a talk. So when you're structuring your information, be mindful to place your most important details at the beginning and then to reinforce them again at the end. Now, if your presentation is long, like this one, you want to break it into smaller sections so that each section has its own beginning and end for maximum effectiveness. So you'll notice in this training today, I've broken it up almost into chapters that each have their own beginning. And you also want to focus on repetition because repeating information is shown to help us retain it in our long-term memories. So I want you to consider this. Within 20 minutes, we forget 40% of what we've learned. After another 40 minutes, we forget half of it. And flash forward to 1 day later, and we have lost almost 70% of what we learned. And for this reason, it's exactly why repetition is a classic technique in advertising, sales, and influential communication of all different types. So if there is an important message you truly want your audience to remember and take away, saying it once is most likely not enough. Now, think about speeches that are really designed to inspire an audience. Repetition of emotionally charged phrases can be deeply effective in those cases. So experts oftentimes point to Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech as one of the best examples of using repetition to emotionally connect with your audience. So put simply, repetition makes your message stick. It emphasizes your main points and it creates the strongest learning. So you can use this by picking a powerful quote, an image, or a statement and repeating it 3 to 5 times throughout your talk. Or using that structure of telling people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them is another good example of using repetition without being annoying in a way that will reinforce your ideas. Great. So now that we have discussed a few ways to connect with your listeners through your words, let's talk a little bit about visually presenting your information. So 99% of the time, you'll be sharing your material in the form of a slide deck. And it's important to remember that your slides are there to aid your presentation, not to be a teleprompter. Many people make this mistake of using their slides as a crutch and just reading off of them verbatim. I definitely used to be extremely guilty of this. There's a few reasons this is a bad move though. So number one is that it detracts from your authority as a presenter. Your audience might make the assumption that you don't know your content well enough or that you've failed to prepare, which can leave a bad impression. So you don't want to fill your slides with every single word you need to say. That only makes the audience question what value you as the speaker actually add. And number two is it's distracting. Instead of listening to you, your audience will try to read what's on the slides. And a wall of text just bores people and makes their eyes gloss over. And number three, this is a reason people usually don't think about, is that it's self-centered. When you give your slides the intention instead of your audience, you make a clear statement that your message and your ego is more important than them. And you eliminate eye contact and other nonverbal cues that are really important for connecting with people. Now, the slides are there for your audience, not for you. And if something is on the slide it needs to be there because it's needed to clarify a point you're making or to somehow visually amplify your words. So you want to use text sparingly, leave a lot of white space for your content to breathe. It's much easier on the eyes. It makes it more mentally pleasing and, most importantly, more digestible for other people. Presentation expert Nancy Duarte puts it this way, and she says that white space drives focus because it frames your content. It feels like oxygen for a slide. If all of our slides are filled with extra stuff, it starts to feel very claustrophobic. And great photography can also set you apart. So visuals do a lot to add interest. Excuse me. Visuals do a lot to add interest to what could be otherwise very dull information. Now, you might not know this, but the human brain actually processes visuals much more quickly than words and actually prefers photos to text. And over 65% of people in the population are visual learners. So great photos are important because they help engage the imagination and bring your storytelling to life with greater meaning and much more depth. So the right image really does have the power to inspire and move people. So you want to use that to your advantage. You just want to make sure you're smart with your photo selection. If you use low quality graphics, like images that are blurry or ones that have pixelation, then your audience may assume that your information is low quality too. So this is thanks to something that's known as the halo effect. And it's where we assume that attractive things are good while unattractive things are bad. So while you may think that just grabbing images off of Google is saving you time, it's actually costing you in the long run in terms of credibility. So that's why using high quality photography is key. And today there's really no excuse for having amazing images to complement your presentation. There are lots of excellent stock photography sites out there. I see some people mentioning them in the comments. Pexels is a great one, where you can get really high quality stock photo completely for free. And you also want to make sure that your visuals match the emotion you want to convey. So for example, using an image of an open sky may convey possibility, freedom, freshness, or using bright colors, you can convey happiness and joy. But you want to be careful not to send the wrong message with your photos too. So one big mistake I often see people make is using cartoonish images in business presentations. Now, it may initially seem like a fun choice to lighten up what might be a professional topic, but it could inadvertently give your material a childish, immature feel, which in people's minds can equate to amateurish. Now, that's something you definitely don't want during a time when you're trying to convey professionalism. Great. So next we're going to cover how to present for results, and I'm going to talk about 3 tips that will help you get your audience to take action. So tip number 1 is to start with an agenda. Psychologically speaking, we find structure soothing. Structure lowers our anxiety because we know what to expect and we can prepare for it. And agendas have the same effect. So they put your attendees at ease, and people feel assured and much more comfortable knowing that you have things under control. Providing an agenda places you in a position of authority. You are taking the leadership role in that interaction, which helps people trust you more. And you want to think of it like your agenda as if it was a roadmap. So your agenda helps inform your audience about where they're going and where they'll ultimately end up. It primes them to get excited about what they're going to learn and the transformation that they'll undergo. And all of this, it positions you as the experience guide, as the one who can help get them there. So a good productive conversation doesn't just happen though, even if you do have a great agenda. You have to drive it. So you still need to deliver your talk in a structured way that leads to success. Now, your structure should have 4 key elements. Number 1 is the introduction. So you want to start by thanking the audience for their time, introduce what you want to talk about, and what they can expect. So an example might be, thanks for joining me today. I want to show you the latest product designs we have. We'll spend about 30 minutes there and then open it up for questions. How does that sound? Number 2 is an objective. So what do you want to accomplish by the end of this meeting? So an example again, by the end of this hour, I'd like to have a decision about which 2 designs we're going to move forward with. Or you might say, my hope for our meeting is to share with you our latest product offerings and decide which is the best fit for your business. And number 3, the body. This is the bulk of your talk where you're sharing information in a compelling way using a lot of the tips we've already mentioned. So you want to be concise and to the point, as we mentioned earlier. Acknowledge your audience's issues, anticipate their objections, and delivering a solution, delivering a message about what solution you provide, all of that goes here in the body. And number 4 is asking questions. Every conversation should have room for soliciting feedback and engaging your listeners in conversation, even if it's just 3 to 5 minutes. Now, for reasons we're going to discuss coming up, that's really important for getting buy-in. And finally, before you wrap up, you need to get confirmation on what's happening next. So who is responsible for what? What are the next steps? What has been agreed to? Always define action steps, roles, responsibilities before closing. That's how you prevent things from those meetings that you have that tend to go nowhere and actually ensure things move forward. And research finds that when people commit to next steps, they're more likely to follow through because we have a human need to be consistent with our actions. So in fact, the American Society of Training and Development did a study and they found that you have a 65% chance of completing a goal if you commit to someone else that you will. And if you have a specific accountability date that you'll check in by, that chance of success goes up to 95%. So it's critical to work on your persuasion and influence skills if you want to get buy-in for your ideas. So in this section, we're going to talk about using psychology to your advantage so that you can get a yes, and we'll also touch on how to bounce back if you do hear a no. So let's talk about making psychology work for you. Over the last 60 years, psychologists and behavioral economists have discovered several different insights about human behavior that we can use to influence people in a positive way. And the first technique I want to mention today is one called social proof. In his book, Influence, psychologist Robert Cialdini describes social proof as the tendency to see an action as more appropriate when other people are doing it. So, in other words, we're more likely to say yes, to buy something, or to take an action if we know other people are doing it. Now, to drive home exactly how important social proof can be, consider that 70% of people look at product reviews before making a buying decision. But product reviews are just one example of social proof. You can use customer testimonials, case studies, Yelp ratings, expert endorsements. All of these help reinforce trust and help someone be more confident in their decision to work with you. This all goes back to that halo effect that I mentioned a little earlier. If your product or solution comes highly recommended from another source, people are automatically more apt to judge it favorably. And another technique is called closing the empathy gap. Now we have a tendency to underestimate just how much people's emotions affect their mental states. We make the assumption that logic persuades people the most. We think that objective facts, stats, and presenting data is what will change people's minds. But the truth is, people are not rational creatures. And at the point when we make decisions, emotions are very important for choosing. So you need to get inside your audience's head. You need to exercise the empathy muscles you have by understanding their needs, their fears, their deepest desires. Your goal in closing the empathy gap is not to tell your audience what to think or to tell them what's best. Your goal is to help them discover that for themselves. You want to help them arrive at what feels right and what feels advantageous and really in their own best interest. So appealing to emotions is all about making them, your listeners, see why something is good for them and what's good for their side. And your job is to position yourself as the solution to those problems and those pain points. Another way to practice empathy is through active listening. So this requires that you listen non-judgmentally and you leave your assumptions at the door. It's hard, I know. But instead, you want to gain insight into other people's thinking. And to show you're hearing them, every so often, you want to reflect back with what you're hearing. So you want to use statements like, it sounds to me like what you're saying is blank. Or you also want to check for understanding. So saying something like, what I'm hearing you're saying is blank. Is that right? Or asking someone, is that what you mean? So you can also use active listening to expose potential objections that they might have. And so that way you can actually work to overcome them. And to do this, I like suggesting posing questions like, what's your biggest concern? What potential roadblocks do you anticipate? What's the best possible outcome here? What's the worst possible outcome here? How can we plan for that? Why is asking questions so important? Do you see what I did there? It's very important because your credibility and the viability of your ideas depends on acknowledging your audience's issues and proving that you understand them through genuine empathy. And that's how you build connection, and that's how you build trust. And finally, even with all these suggestions, it's possible that you may hear a no. So what do you do at that point? You open the door for compromise. I teach my clients an assertive communication technique that they can use to bounce back from rejection, which is called workable compromise. And put simply, this means that if your request is denied or you're rejected, then you want to propose an alternative solution, one that both of you can live with and that both of you get some sort of benefit from. So to reach a workable compromise, you want to start by opening the door for dialogue. So encourage the person to reiterate their concerns, bring their objections to the table. And by doing so, you create an opportunity to smooth over any disagreements. Because after all, you can only meet someone halfway if you understand what they'd actually like to be different. So finding a workable compromise is all about building relationships and working things out together. So here are some examples of what that might look like. Let's say you get pushback on a price, which is a big one I hear. So you could say something like, my goal is to find a number that works for both of us. How can we get there? Or if you get pushback on timing, they're saying that's too fast for us to make a decision. You might mention, I hear that Monday is too early to make a decision. What if we check in again next week? If you can forge a bond with your audience and show that you're on their side, that is the ultimate way to get buy-in. So putting it all together. So let's do a quick review of what we covered today. So first, you discovered how to communicate your ideas effectively by making your information more concise and memorable. You also learned about the importance of connecting with your audience through the power of visuals to reinforce your message. And next, we talked about presenting for results, namely how you should use structure to drive a conversation and position yourself as the authority. You discovered how to get firm commitments that lead to next steps and actually keep things moving forward. And finally, we looked at influence and persuasion strategies to gain buy-in for your ideas. So now you know how to leverage social proof, empathy, and active listening skills to actually help you get to a yes. And you also have the workable compromise tool if you do need to rebound from rejection and get back on your feet. So with that, now that I've been talking for a while, I want to practice what I preach and open the floor up to you. So if you do have questions, I see we have a few waiting, but go ahead and pop those in the comments. I'm going to get to as many as I can. But I would also love to hear what stood out to you. So which of these strategies or steps that we talked about today will you be trying in your next presentation? So maybe you'll experiment with adding more social proof or using more visuals. If you do have a presentation coming up that you're preparing for, then now is a great time to be researching your audience and trying to understand their pain points, anticipating questions. You can put together your talk using the structure that we talked about and get your agenda together. Lots you can do. There's so many options, but I want to hear from what you will be trying. So I see Leanne is saying brevity is really important to her. Be concise, great reminder. Active listening is something. The tip on not using cartoons, very important. We overlook these small things and we don't always realize the signals they are sending to other people. And being concise and being brief, like I said, a lot of times that brings up limiting beliefs for people for not being enough. We equate quantity with quality, and they're not the same thing. So you want to focus on precision with your language over just a large quantity of language. So if you can state your point powerfully and concisely, that is a whole lot better than sort of word vomiting on for a long period of time. So, okay, I am going to check out what we have here in the Q&A, if I can get it to open. So let's see, bear with me as I find where the Q&A is hiding. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so Charles asked, are there any handouts? So there will be a replay sent after the webinar today. You will get the recording and you will get the slides from this presentation. So no worries about that. And so Deb asked a question, how do you be concise when you're handling highly scientific material in a PowerPoint? So Deb, let me know if I am getting your answer correct or not. I believe that's what you're saying. So being concise with scientific material is a challenge. I work with a lot of people who work in very highly scientific fields. And what tends to work best here is keeping your slides as concise as possible, but mentioning and creating another takeaway. So if you have I like to think of creating an accordion presentation. That's what I call it, is you want a presentation that you can make smaller or expand if you need to. So my suggestion is to always be concise when presenting, but if you have to create another deck or have a Google Doc or have something that people can take away where they can get the full report and all the numbers, you want to focus on being concise in your actual slides, presenting the highlights, the key results, but be able to have somewhere where you can point different audience members to where they can get the full write-up and the information. So let me know if that helps answer your question. And I'm just reading through some questions here. So a lot of people asking this question about my organization always ask for high-level information, but then they want a lot of details. So how do I bridge that gap? So what I mentioned before is having the high-level takeaways and highlights on your actual slides and your visuals, and having somewhere else that you can point people to that is a takeaway document. That's my suggestion. And someone asked, how do I plan my day in terms of being structured? It's not a random question. I actually get this question quite a bit. And we're actually going to have some more presentations coming up about planning your time and being more mindful in your day. So stay tuned for that. And so Diana asked, what if the presentation format is more formal, where there aren't opportunities for back and forth with your audience? Should you ask one question at the beginning and at the end? Diana, this is a great question. My suggestion is to send, if you don't anticipate that there will be a lot of interaction in the presentation itself, my suggestion is to send ahead of time with your agenda a question you'd like people to think about coming into your presentation, so that they're primed, they're thinking about your topic. And if you do have time at the end, people are already thinking about it, you're getting them engaged, you're using that power of questions and roping them in with interest that way, without having to waste time with a lot of that back and forth. And my suggestion is to also set the expectation up front that if people do have questions, ask them to please hold those for the end. You're going to hold aside 3 to 5 minutes and you'll have the opportunity to answer them then. But what you do want to prevent is people just interrupting you in the middle of your talk and taking you off track. So this is where that expectation setting, using the agenda, using the structure up front is so important to help you from getting derailed and being caught off guard. And speaking of getting caught off guard, there was a great question that came in earlier that I want to address. So Renee asked, sometimes you'll be rolling along in a presentation and someone will object or interrupt you. What do you do then? And how do you get back on track when someone has, when you've been caught off guard? One of my best suggestions here is to manage your own emotional state. So take a deep breath before you sort of overreact, but to buy yourself time. So to have some key phrases in your back pocket, like, that's a great question, let me get back to you about that. Or thanks for your feedback, give me some time to digest what you've asked and I'll get back to you. To buy you some time. But there are a few other techniques. These are often used in interviewing. One is called bridging, which is, bridging is often used when an interviewer tries to take someone into a topic area that they're not very comfortable with. And so you can use these types of statements to build a bridge back to what you are comfortable talking about. So bridging statements are things like, from my own experience, I can say that blank, or I can't speak to X, but what I can say is Y. Or sometimes you want to use what's called flagging techniques. And these are other ways to reinforce your ideas, to emphasize your main points, by calling more attention to them. So it's almost like placing a flag in a book or staking a flag in the ground. So you might say something like, if you remember one thing from this presentation, I want it to be this, blank. The point I want to underscore is blank. So those are some ways if someone does interrupt you and you need to get back on track. You can also use redirection, which is turning the question back on the audience. So it might be a question from your boss and you might say, well, that's a great question. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the strategy. So Renee, I see you're here. I hope that answers your question. Let's see. And just bear with me. I'm going through the questions right now. So we have a question about recommendations for time duration of a presentation for executives versus coworkers. This is a great question. Here's what I'll say. People often, I'm not sure I could give a definitive answer for each group. I will say that executives are extremely busy people. The more you can get to the point and save them time, the better. So in general, I would say that any presentation that goes on longer than an hour or 45 minutes is too long. People's attention spans are going to fade. If you need to break up what is a long presentation into 2 different times, maybe you give a half hour at one time, you do a break, you give another half hour. But your audience will get mentally fatigued, no matter who it is. Executives are very short on time. So the more you can respect their time, get right to the point, dive right in, and upfront set that expectation of, I want to respect your time today, so I'm going to dive right in, they'll appreciate that. Now, what I see people do is make the mistake of mixing the purposes of meetings or presentations. So if you're giving let's say, this happens a lot with, let's say, end of year strategy planning. That's a big one right now. Excuse me. End of year strategy planning, where people are putting together goals for the next year. In this would be a great example of where you want to separate out the goals and objectives for those meetings. So you really should have one meeting where you're focused on delivering and sharing what your goals, your strategy, your objectives for that upcoming year might be. And most likely that should be a separate meeting from talking about, if there are agreements that need to be made or things that need to be talked through. That should most likely be a separate meeting, because that's going to take a lot of different time. And so what I see people do is try to accomplish too many different goals in one meeting or presentation, if that makes sense. So that might be more common, particularly with coworkers, or you might try to mash a lot of time together if you only have executives for a certain period of time. So just be mindful of that. So David asks, can you elaborate a little more on social proof? In a selling situation, does that equate to profiling similar clients in their industry? Yes, exactly. Social proof is any means to show your credibility. So examples might be using logos of other clients you've worked with. Trusted by, and then you have logos of different clients you've worked with. Could be a case study of what you've accomplished for similar customers in that industry. It could be partners you have. So if you partner with other types of organizations that are really trusted, you could put that. If your website has trusted technology on it, that's another version of social proof. Testimonials, comments from your customers, a client list of people you've worked with in the past. Like I said, ratings from Facebook, Google reviews, Yelp reviews, all of those are forms of social proof. And I am just scrolling through, so bear with me. Let's see. So Diana, I know you're here, and Diana, for everyone who's listening, is from the Beautiful team. And Diana, we do have a question here from Andrew, who asks, what are the benefits of Beautiful versus PowerPoint? Do you think it's appropriate for a scientific presentation? I will say, from personally using Beautiful, that if you are someone who deals with having to create a lot of different graphs and visualizations of data, then Beautiful will be a game changer. I will say that, but Diana, I did want to let you know that was a question that came through, so if you want to address it in the comments, and that was from Andrew. Let's see. So a couple more questions. Yeah, so Lucille mentioned, have I heard of the 5x15 presentations? 5 slides in 15 minutes. It really makes people be more concise. So yes, absolutely, I've heard of those, the rapid fire. presentations. It shows you just how it forces you. Simple is not easy, right? Simple can be very hard, and simple actually takes a lot of work. So you may find that you need to get out a really messy draft first. Don't be scared by that. Don't let the fact that you have to get out a really bad version of something, a really messy, very verbose version of your presentation first. That doesn't mean you're bad at communicating. That just means you have to go back and, like an artist chipping away at clay, you have to refine it, and you have to dig out your message, your core message, as you go through it and you sit with it and you digest it and work on it. That will actually clarify what you're trying to say. So it always starts with a messy beginning. So I don't want anyone here to think that if you have been in that position, that you're a bad communicator. Great. So I am just scanning. Wonderful, wonderful. Seems like a lot of people, great, going to use a lot of these tips. That's amazing. So since we are just about on time, I want to thank all of you for being here today. Stay tuned because, like I said, you will be getting the replay in your inbox and the slides. And keep your eye out for some future events that we'll be having in 2019. We're working on a training about working mindfully, about how to use mindfulness to lower your stress and become more focused. So if that sounds exciting to you, or it's something that you're interested in, let me know in the comments so that we can gauge interest for that. But once again, I really do want to thank you for being here, for making this time. I know you are all so busy, so it means a lot to me that you take this time out of your day to be here and show up. I sincerely hope this was useful. And once again, I do want to thank our sponsor, Beautiful, for bringing us this training. The presentation you watched today was built in Beautiful, so you already have a taste of how awesome it actually is, and everything that you can do with it. And like I mentioned before, I wouldn't be mentioning this if this wasn't a product I personally used and actually believed in. So I really do love it. So definitely go to melodywilding.com/beautiful. I will put that in the comments here just so you all have it. Great. So definitely head over to that link so you can start making your free presentations today. And I will see you all soon. Thanks again for being here.